You wake before dawn to a low chant rising from the edge of camp. It's not threatening. It's more like a hum threading through the mist, as if the forest itself is stretching yawning. Njinga is already up, of course, standing at the riverbank, with her sleeves rolled, rinsing her face with the kind of ceremonial stillness that turns an ordinary act into a statement. You follow quietly, trying not to snap too many twigs. Today isn't about war or treaties, it's about legacy. Because queens don't just fight battles, they build myths. And Njinga, she's way ahead of the curve. Mainstream fact: by the 1640s, Njina began rebranding herself not merely as Queen of Ndongo and Matamba, but as an almost messianic figure, God's chosen ruler, blessed by the spirits of the land and baptized in the waters of resistance. She literally redefined her role until even her enemies didn't know whether to fear or worship her. She doesn't wear a crown, not today. Instead, she's wrapped in white linen from shoulder to ankle, her face unpainted, her hair brushed back into a low twist. You almost miss the sharpness in her eyes. It's the only clue this is the same woman who once personally beheaded a rebel to prove a point. That's your fringe fact for this section. Yes, that happened during an attempted coup, and yes, she did it without flinching. But this morning, she's not a warrior. She's something more complex: queen, priestess, mother of a nation. Her advisors stand a few paces behind, silent heads lowered. One holds a clay vessel, the other a sheaf of palm leaves braided with beads. It's a ritual, not a public one. This is for the ancestors, for the land, maybe for herself. Nyinga kneels and whispers into the earth. You can't catch the words, but they carry the weight of things, unspoken, lost. Siblings burned, villages, lovers betrayed. She presses her palm to the dirt and breathes deep. And then suddenly she laughs. Not cruelly, not mockingly. It's this strange, warm laugh, like she's just remembered a joke only she finds funny. She stands, brushes off her knees, and says to no one in particular, "They think I became a god to scare them. I did it because I had to." There's a debate among historians, of course there is. They still argue whether Njinga truly believed in her own divinity or simply used it as political theater. Some say she was deeply spiritual, others say it was pure strategy. Maybe like most powerful women in history, she did what she needed to and let the world interpret it however it liked. You walk with her later that day into the lowlands toward a circle of huts ringed with cassava plants and guarded by an old man who once served her father. He greets her with a bowed head, muttering blessings in a dialect older than Kimbundu. Inside, sitting cross-legged on mats, are 5 girls between the ages of 10 and 14. They rise in unison when Jinga enters, not trained to, just taught by the rhythm of respect. These are her protégées, not daughters by blood, but chosen ones. One of them will likely become a general. Another might run a diplomatic post. One is being groomed as a spiritual medium. All are taught to fight, to read, to listen, to the wind, to the sky, to each other. Your mainstream historical detail here: Njinga established a royal court where women held equal rank to men and in many cases outranked them. Female generals, female scribes, female spies, Ndongo and Matamba, under her, were closer to a matriarchy than most people today even realize. As you watch, she tests one of the girls in a mock debate. The topic: whether to trust Portuguese traders who promise guns but arrive late. The girl no more than 11 makes a solid argument for maintaining communication channels without opening trade. Jinga nods but pushes harder. What if they bring priests instead of muskets, she asks. The girl pauses, then answers. Then we trade prayer for silence. Nyinga grins. The old man chuckles. You shiver. You help carry firewood that evening, shoulders aching from the day's heat. The camp smells like roasted maize and ash. Njinga sits cross-legged beneath a mango tree surrounded by musicians. No dancing tonight, just low pulsing rhythms that seem to vibrate through the soles of your feet. She tells a story about her grandmother, how she once scared off a lion by pretending to be possessed. It wasn't even a real lion, Njinga admits with a smirk. Just a badly fed hyena. But still, point was made. Everyone laughs, including you, because the point was made, over and over, for years. This woman who grew up trailing behind warriors who learned to rule in a world built to erase her, she didn't just hold on. She bent time, bent tradition, bent kingdoms to her will. The folding chair leans quietly in the corner, a little scuffed one, hinge slightly crooked from travel. You wonder what it's seen. How many rivals have had to look up at her quite literally because she refused to kneel or stand on uneven ground? And as the night deepens and Jinga's voice settles into stories, half fable, half report, you realize this is what legacy looks like. Not just bloodlines or battlefields, but storytelling rituals, symbols passed down with just enough mystery to keep people guessing. Because whether you believed Njinga was a saint, a tyrant, a witch, or a queen of impossible brilliance, one thing's for sure. She wrote her own myth, and she made damn sure we'd still be whispering it. The air is thick with a tropical stillness, the kind that wraps around your shoulders like damp wool. Crickets hum at the fringes of the clearing, but the camp is silent. Jinga sits alone by the firehead, bent over a worn scroll. It's written in Latin, and you're mildly surprised she doesn't just toss it into the flames. After all, these were the same people who once tried to baptize her into submission. But instead she reads slowly, lips barely moving. You get the sense this isn't about the words, it's about power, ownership, taking back what was once used to break her and now using it to reinforce her. This is the long game. Here's your mainstream fact: by the 1650s, Jinga had not only re-established Matamba as a regional power, but had begun formal negotiations with the Vatican. She invited missionaries, supported the Christian faith outwardly, and cleverly balanced it with her native beliefs. This duality wasn't hypocrisy, it was diplomacy in its purest, most strategic form. You hear rustling behind you. Two guards emerge, not in armor, but in ceremonial robes carrying bundles wrapped in animal hide. One places his carefully at Njinga's feet, while the other unfolds a cloth revealing a ring of iron keys. Keys to what? Good question. You're not told. But Njinga nods, signs something with her thumbprint, and dismisses them with a flick of her fingers. It's this moment, this quiet, bureaucratic exchange, that shows you more than any battlefield could. Because holding a kingdom together for over 3 decades, that takes paperwork and trust and a memory like steel. The folding chair, her infamous accessory, sits beside her again. This time it's been polished. A servant has tied a red tassel to one leg. You're not sure what it means, but no one questions it. You've learned better by now. Quirky tidbit time: Jinga is believed to have developed her own form of coded communication, specific gestures, and woven patterns used among her inner circle to pass messages without ever speaking. Some say these included beads sewn into clothing that could be read like braille across a shoulder. Scholars haven't confirmed it fully, but colonial diaries do mention unusual behavior and inexplicable coordination among her followers. She rises and walks toward the elder's hut, passing soldiers, weavers, children, all of whom greet her with a kind of casual reverence. There's no pomp, no forced bowing. She's among them, but still unmistakably above. Inside the hut is a small table and three men waiting. One is Portuguese, his jacket too tight and his face too pink. The other two are Mbangala chieftains, wrapped in thick capes adorned with skull beads. Njinga takes her place not at the table, but on her folding chair just next to it. Already a power move. She speaks Kimabundu. The interpreter stammers, but Njinga lets him catch up. Her words are slow, deliberate. She's offering trade routes, salt for cloth iron, for rum, but with conditions. Always conditions. The Portuguese man protests. Something about delays, about Portuguese rights, about promises made by long-dead governors. Njinga tilts her head, smiles, waits. Then almost lazily she signals. The scroll from earlier is brought forward unrolled and shown to the group. Latin again. A copy of a treaty signed by someone from Lisbon, whose name even the pink-faced man doesn't recognize. But Njinga remembers. Of course she does. She recites a paragraph in flawless Latin. The missionary nearby nearly drops his cross. Historians still argue whether she was truly fluent or simply memorized key sections through repetition. But in this moment, the performance is airtight. The Portuguese man falls silent. The Mbangala chieftains nod approvingly. Business continues. You sit outside eavesdropping through a thin crack in the wall. Someone hands you a carved nut full of honeyed palm wine. You sip and think diplomacy is a lot more terrifying than war. At least in war, people know when to run. Later that night, Njinga stands before a canvas map pinned to a tree trunk. It shows not only her territory, but Portuguese forts, Dutch outposts, and interior trade hubs. Tiny colored stones mark troop movements, resources, and something that looks suspiciously like spy routes. She's playing five sides of a chessboard at once and winning. But there's a growing tension beneath the surface. You can feel it in the conversations. Whispers of betrayal, of internal power struggles. Njinga's body is older now, her gait more deliberate. She favors one knee, but her eyes just as sharp as the first time she slid into that chair and dared a room full of men to blink. Another fun detail in her final years, Njinga supposedly trained two parrots to scream the phrase, "Never trust a priest in Kimbundu." The missionaries were not amused. The parrots were popular. She spends the evening writing. Yes, writing, not dictating, writing with her own hand in thick charcoal ink. Letters, treaties, maybe a journal. One page flutters in the wind and lands at your feet. It's a list, names of girls' ages, villages, and notes like strong lungs, quick mind watches everything. You realize she's scouting her next generation of leaders even now. Because the queen doesn't sleep. Not really. You've watched her nap with one eye open and a dagger beneath her mat. You lean back and stare at the stars, heart oddly full. This isn't just history, it's theater, strategy, faith, and exhaustion, all braided into one life. And somewhere in the night you hear one of the parrots shriek from a perch in a mango tree, "Never trust a priest. You nearly choke on your wine." You wake to the low rhythm of drums pulsing through the air like a heartbeat. It's not the sound of celebration. It's slower, measured ceremonial. You push aside a woven mat and blink at the gray light of early dawn. Mist clings to the undergrowth, and smoke from the cook fires snakes lazily toward the treetops. Nyinga is already up, of course. She stands in front of a circle of girls, maybe a dozen, all barefoot, their hair braided close to the scalp. Each holds a long staff and wears simple cotton tunics marked with indigo patterns. You watch from the edge unnoticed. She walks slowly among them, correcting stances, murmuring instructions. The staves aren't just sticks, they're tools of balance, discipline, and eventually defense. And you think, these are the girls from the list. Your historical anchor today, Njinga, was known for training female bodyguards, many of whom also served as administrators' envoys and battlefield leaders. This wasn't just about protection, it was about grooming successors, building a network of trust that ran deeper than bloodlines. When Njinga took power, she didn't just inherit a throne, she created a government. One of the girls stumbles. Njinga stops, kneels, and adjusts the girl's grip. You hear her whisper, "Steady hands hold kingdoms." Later, Njinga sits cross-legged beneath a baobab tree, a clay bowl of cassava porridge in her lap. She eats slowly, watching a trader unload baskets of dried fish and copper rings. Around her, the air buzzes with quiet industry scribes, tally grain stocks, messengers swap updates from the riverfront, and a goat tries very hard to eat someone's scroll. It's a full scene, not glamorous but real. This is the side of leadership history classes skip. Not just battles and treaties, but managing supply chains, inspecting irrigation ditches, and reminding your soldiers to wear sandals so they don't get parasites. Yes, even in 17th century Angola, foot hygiene mattered. Quirky tidbit: Njinga apparently banned yawning in her court. It was seen as disrespectful or lazy, and considering how little she herself seemed to sleep at tracks. One Portuguese observer noted that her court is ruled not by bells, but by the breath of her own resolve. Very poetic, very intimidating. But Njinga's greatest challenge now isn't foreign threats. It's legacy. Her sister Barbara, who had been both rival and companion, has died. The event shakes Njinga more than any ambush or betrayal ever could. They had battled each other, forgiven each other, and rebuilt together. And now she's gone. The folding chair sits empty by the fire that night, its silhouette casting a shadow like a gap in a row of teeth. Historians still argue whether Njinga truly intended to convert back to Catholicism in her final years, or if it was another tactical move to ensure Portuguese recognition of her chosen successor. What's clear is that after Barbara's death, something shifts. You notice she begins meeting more often with missionaries, not just for political gain, but almost conversationally, asking questions, testing boundaries, challenging doctrine with the same edge she once used on generals. One priest writes that she debated like a jurist, loved God like a queen, and smiled like she knew more than heaven itself. She commissions the construction of a small stone church in her capital. It's modest, no stained glass, no choir, but the altar is carved with local symbols, a subtle blend of Christian iconography and Kimbundu cosmology. If you squint, the cross looks suspiciously like the iron keys from earlier. She holds court in the church's courtyard now. The folding chair is always with her, sometimes draped in royal cloth, other times bare and utilitarian. You watch her settle into it before a tense audience with Dutch merchants who've suddenly remembered they're interested in inland trade again. They bring tobacco rifles and bribes. Njinga brings silence. And somehow she wins. You've seen her fold empires in half like the legs of that chair. That evening, she retreats to a shaded platform where a young boy waits barely 10 with sharp eyes and a nervous posture. He's the son of one of her cousins, and word is she's considering adopting him. Not as heir necessarily, but as a bridge. You hear her ask him questions not about combat or taxes, but about rivers, animals, dreams. He answers slowly, then faster, until he's describing a bird he saw with feathers the color of smoke. Njinga listens, eyes half-lidded, but not dismissive. She nods and says, "Then you must learn to track it. A queen follows every strange wing." As the boy leaves, a parrot swoops down and lands on Njinga's shoulder. This one doesn't yell anything rude. It just blinks and fluffs its feathers. You start to wonder if she trained it for calm. A mood bird, maybe. Later that week, Njinga vanishes for 3 days. No fanfare, no announcement. Just disappears into the bush with 3 guards and a satchel of dried figs. Panic ripples through the court, but no one dares follow her. On the fourth morning, she reappears dusty, scratched, and wearing a necklace made of bones. You're pretty sure weren't there before. She says nothing about the trip, but she places a carved staff on the floor of the temple and leaves it there. Here's something unexpected. There's an old Angolan folktale that speaks of a woman who tames storms with a walking stick carved from the heartwood of a cursed tree. She appears at times of great transition and then disappears again, leaving only a seat-shaped shadow behind. You look at Njinga, then at the staff, then at the folding chair. You don't say anything, but you wonder. You stretch your legs beneath the thatched awning, listening to the soft creak of Njinga's folding chair settling into place behind you. She hasn't spoken yet, but the court is already quiet, its anticipation like static in the air. Across the courtyard, scribes lean over wooden slates, waiting to capture whatever verdict or proclamation she's about to deliver. But Njinga doesn't start with words. Instead, she lifts a wooden bowl, ornately carved, polished smooth, and begins to pour water from it, slowly, deliberately onto the dusty ground. It's a ritual, one you've seen before, a libation for the ancestors, an invitation for the past to sit with the present. The puddle she creates darkens the ochre soil beneath her chair, just enough to hold a reflection. You watch as she studies that reflection. Here's your big historical anchor. By the 1650s, Njinga had not only reclaimed her kingdom of Ndongo, but had extended her influence over neighboring Matamba. She signed treaties balanced between Dutch and Portuguese interests and solidified her position as one of the most powerful monarchs in Central Africa. And yet in her later years, her attention turned not outward, but downward, inward, toward land succession and something no treaty could guarantee: memory. Around her, women in layered cloth step forward to present tribute baskets of palm oil, tightly coiled rope beads carved from malachite. One even brings a massive gourd painted with a swirling design that looks suspiciously like a snake eating its tail. You raise an eyebrow. Njinga just smirks. "A good symbol for politics," she murmurs. "You eat your enemies until you run out. Then you eat yourself." The court laughs lightly, nervously, but not everyone is smiling. Off to the side, a Portuguese envoy watches with tight lips. His boots are too clean for someone who's been here long. You recognize him sent from Luanda to reinforce a new round of trade demands. He wants better routes, more ivory, and as always, access to human resources. The man hasn't learned. Nyinga listens to him drone on with a face carved from ironwood. And then she does something you don't expect. She asks for her folding chair. Not her throne, not the beaded stool that denotes royal blood. The chair. An attendant brings it out creaking and sun-bleached, the same one you've seen in war camps and parades on riverbanks and church steps. She unfolds it herself slowly like a ceremony and sits. Instantly the air changes. The envoy falters mid-sentence. Here's the quirky tidbit. The original story about Njinga and her folding chair is often told in Portuguese records with a mix of awe and confusion. Supposedly, when she first met with the Portuguese governor of Luanda in 1622, they offered her no seat, expecting her to stand before them. So Njinga ordered a servant to kneel and use their back as a makeshift chair. Brutal maybe, symbolic absolutely. But many modern historians now think this was actually the origin of her folding chair, a symbol of sovereignty you bring with you, a throne you carry in your hands. Now, decades later, the chair is more than a prop. It's the history lesson the envoy failed to read. You watch as Njinga speaks not loudly, not angrily, but with the slow cadence of someone who's rehearsed every possible outcome in her head. She tells the envoy that the Portuguese must negotiate not as masters, but as equals, that her land will remain sovereign, that any trade must pass through her terms, her hands, and that if necessary, she will take up arms again, not because she loves war, but because she hates losing. The folding chair creaks again as she leans forward. You came here thinking you had the power, she says. But I came with my chair. Historians still argue whether this scene actually happened. Some say Njinga grew more conciliatory in her later years. Others insist her fire never dimmed. There's even debate about whether the folding chair truly became a diplomatic symbol, or if that was a later invention layered onto her legend. But if you were there right now, you'd believe every word. That night, under a harvest moon fat enough to burst, Njinka sits by the river with her adopted heir. The boy rests his head on her knee, half asleep, tracing patterns in the dirt with a stick. She hums an old song, maybe one from her childhood, or one she made up on the spot. You lie nearby, staring at the chair beside her. It's folded now, leaning against a log, its legs muddy, one hinge patched with twine. It's not a royal object, it's a tool, a witness. Like the carved iron keys the staff left in the church. The cross that looks a bit like an ancestral symbol. Layers on layers. She speaks without turning her head. Do you know why I carry it? You don't answer. But the boy does, so you're never beneath anyone. She nods, and so I can leave when I choose. There's something quietly radical in that. Queens don't usually walk away from power, but Njinga always understood that real power wasn't in staying, it was in knowing when to move, when to strike, when to fold the chair and disappear into the mist. By the time the moon sinks, you realize she's gone. Only the chair remains dusted with dew. You walk over and run your fingers along the seat, still warm. And just beneath it, scratched into the wood in tiny script, are three words, maybe a motto, maybe a farewell. Rasui sit, rule. The morning mist curls around the riverbank like a lazy cat clinging to the reeds and low brush as the first light creeps in. You're alone now. The sounds of Njinga's court have dissolved into birdsong and the whispering rustle of trees above. But you're not unsettled. Her absence feels intentional part of the story, not a break from it. And the folding chair. It's still here right where she left it. A little worn one leg, stained but standing. Waiting. You bend to touch it again, and in your mind you replay all the places it's been. Every creak of the frame tells a different tale, and not just of battles and parades, but of moments where Njinga rewrote the rules with nothing more than presence. That's the legacy now, not just a ruler with titles, but a woman who outmaneuvered empires while folding and unfolding a piece of furniture like it was part of her armor. Let's go back a little because history has a habit of tying its laces out of order. In the late 1650s, Njinga had entered her 70s, a remarkable age, at a time when life expectancy often wavered somewhere around "don't get your hopes up." Despite that, she remained sharp, regal, and more politically active than many half her age. Her advisors younger, her patience thinner, her enemies still confused about how she kept winning. By then, she had built up Matamba into a formidable power, developed internal roadways for trade, and established permanent embassies with European powers. She'd even helped reform the military structure, ensuring it was no longer just a collection of clans, but a true national force. Her vision of a centralized African state wasn't a dream, it was blueprinting itself into reality. Now here's the quirky detail that rarely makes textbooks. Njinga had a thing for ceremony. She would host long audiences where guests had to speak in riddles. She orchestrated feasts where dishes symbolized aspects of war and peace, and she often kept a pet monkey which may or may not have been trained to mimic the gestures of foreign envoys. Imagine delivering a speech and having a small monkey nod dramatically behind you. Real or exaggerated, hard to say. But it fits, doesn't it? More critically, Njinga took painstaking care to secure her legacy. She baptized again publicly this time, and not just for diplomacy, but as part of a plan to ensure her realm would not be dismissed or dismantled when she passed. She arranged for Christian missionary schools, drafted conversion-friendly trade laws, and fostered a delicate hybrid of tradition and foreign faith. She even wrote letters directly to the Vatican, some of which survive today, where she insists on her status as both queen and Christian, refusing to be simplified into one box or the other. Still, historians argue whether this late embrace of Christianity was genuine. Was it a strategy to ease Portuguese aggression, a final attempt to unify a kingdom built from two fiercely different peoples? Or did she, after everything, believe in the forgiveness that Christianity offered? Whatever the answer, Njinga managed something truly rare. She changed visibly publicly without surrendering power. Most monarchs calcify with age. She adapted. The folding chair remained with her throughout. When her time finally came in 1663, she died peacefully in the capital of Matamba. No great battle, no fiery last stand, just a closing of the eyes, a breath let go. Her people mourned for weeks, and according to oral accounts passed down for centuries, the folding chair was placed at the head of her funeral procession. Empty. It's hard to say what happened to it after. Some say it was burned with her, a final symbol collapsing into ash. Others believe it was buried deep in a hidden grave known only to her closest attendants. A few argue it still exists, passed down in secret by queens who never quite made it to the European records. But you know what? That chair could be anywhere. It could be in a museum labeled Ceremonial Object 17th Century Angola. gathering dust while tourists wander by unaware. Or maybe it was never real at all, but a living metaphor that grew legs and slats and hinges in the minds of those who needed it. What matters is that it endured and that you carry its idea with you now. You fold the chair gently and sling it over your shoulder. It's heavier than you expected, but solid, reliable, a little like Njinga herself. You take a few steps into the forest, feeling the weight shift, and you realize you know how it moves now. You know how to carry it, maybe how to use it. Somewhere in the dense whispering trees, a new court waits to be built. Not with marble or gold, but with clarity steel and the quiet power of a chair you brought yourself. Word count 1098. Wind down 300 words. You've followed her through the courts and jungle trails across river banks and under vaulted cathedral ceilings. And now with the stars sliding slowly into place overhead, the story settles around you like a familiar quilt. The night is cooler, the wind softer. Jinga's voice, once sharp and clear, now fades like a melody remembered just before sleep. You lie back the folding chair, no longer a symbol, but a feeling something steady beneath you. Something earned. The fire's gone low and the shadows stretch longer, gentler. There's no need to keep watch anymore. The kingdoms have found their peace. The battles have turned into songs, and the woman who once knelt on her servant's back now rests immortal in the minds of those who still speak her name. Quiet now, easy. You breathe in and out. Let the weight of history settle into softness. Let the memories stretch into dreams. There are no more negotiations tonight. No more envoys, no more treaties, no more choosing between gods and guns. Just the gentle creak of the chair beside you, swaying in a wind older than maps. Your eyes begin to close. The jungle hushes itself. The ancestors nod from the edges of the firelight. And you're already drifting. Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into 17th century Central Africa, where empires rise with ceremony fold with silence, and sometimes sit a little too literally on top of people. You're standing in the twilight haze of Ndongo, where the sun dips into red hills and the scent of rain-wet stone mingles with wood smoke from royal cook fires. In the distance, a drumbeat taps out some kind of courtly rhythm, slow and persistent, like someone tapping their fingers on the armrest of history. You're here for Queen Jinga, but don't expect a red carpet or a grand throne waiting at the gates. In fact, if you're hoping for furniture of any kind, you may be disappointed. You see, Queen Jinga of Ndongo was many things: a strategist, a spiritual chameleon, a master of psychological warfare. But she was not particularly sentimental about seating arrangements. And honestly, that may be what gets you in trouble tonight. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're joining me from somewhere far away, drop your location and local time in the comments, because nothing bonds us quite like a shared sleeplessness across time zones. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing now on a woven mat outside the royal compound. Clay walls rise high, plastered smooth and painted in ochres and reds. The air is humid, buzzing faintly with the sound of insects the size of small spoons. It's 1622, and the Kingdom of Ndongo has been feeling the pinch of Portuguese interference for some time now. Ivory copper slaves, everything has become tangled up in foreign ambitions, and the local rulers are struggling to keep their balance. Which brings us to tonight's star, Njinga Mbandi. She's not queen yet, not officially. That's still her brother Ngola Mbande, the sitting king, though not everyone would call him particularly good at sitting or ruling. Right now, Njinga serves as envoy negotiator and, when necessary, family babysitter. She's been sent on missions that would have broken lesser nobles, parleying with Portuguese governors, brokering peace, and somehow managing to speak both Kimbundu and Portuguese in a way that makes everyone feel like they're about to lose the argument. You hear a horn call in the distance. Something ceremonial, probably. Njinga's palace, or at least the temporary court she maintains in the absence of a fixed capital, doesn't look like much at first. But then you notice the details. Ivory carvings etched into pillars. Leopard skins flanking the door like motionless guards. And an actual guard who glares at you before relaxing once he notices your extremely average threat level. Inside Njinga is in motion. She walks like a chess piece that knows exactly how many spaces it can move. Her robes are deep indigo edged with patterns so intricate you could mistake them for the veins of a leaf. She's not tall, but she doesn't need height. She has gravity. People bend toward her when she passes like grass after wind. There's no throne in the chamber, just a mat, a few cushions, and a chair. Of sorts. You've probably heard the story. She arrives for negotiations with the Portuguese, and they give her nothing to sit on. Their own governor lounges on a tall-backed chair like a smug teapot while Njinga is left to stand a power move subtle as a slap. But Njinga, she doesn't flinch. She gestures to her retinue and one of her servants drops to their knees. She sits on him like it's the most normal thing in the world. It is not the most normal thing in the world, but it becomes unforgettable. Was it cruel, regal, practical? Historians still argue whether this moment was staged spontaneous or simply exaggerated over time. Some say it never happened. Others say it defined her legacy. Either way, you're now in a palace where people sit carefully just in case. Outside, the sky goes fully navy. You hear the soft footfall of barefoot messengers on packed earth, carrying secrets and scrolls between chambers. Someone brings Njinga a calabash bowl. You don't know what's inside wine, maybe, but she sips it with the casual menace of someone who knows it was probably poisoned by someone last month. The Portuguese may think they're playing chess, but Njinga's playing some kind of advanced board game with pieces you've never seen. She's been trained in politics, war, and rhetoric. She's fluent in diplomatic theatrics. She's even been baptized as a political maneuver, not a spiritual one, and took the name Ana de Sousa in honor of the governor's wife. That's not obedience. That's theater. But here's a fringe detail historians love to whisper about. Njinga allegedly took a liking to folding chairs after that infamous negotiation stunt. Not for their practicality, no, she had servants for that, but for what they represented: the ability to create power wherever she sat. The throne wasn't wood and gold, it was attention, control, optics. Tonight you watch her quietly examine a letter sealed with Portuguese wax. She doesn't open it, not yet. It rests on her lap like a coiled snake. You notice the slight twitch in her eye when she finally breaks the seal. She already knows what's inside, of course. It's not paranoia if they really are scheming. Outside, another drum beat sounds. You count the rhythm: 5 slow, 2 fast. Probably a message from Matamba, or just someone announcing dinner. In Jenga's court, everything carries double meaning. You begin to nod off, eyes heavy from candle smoke and the thick perfume of frangipani. But just before sleep wins, you glance back at her and she's watching you. Or maybe she always was. You wake her half-awake to the smell of morning millet porridge and the soft swish of reed brooms scraping the floor. Sunlight filters through the lattice of the roof, casting broken grids across the clay walls. Queen Jinga has already been up for hours naturally. She's not the sort to lounge. Her day begins before yours and ends after yours, and somewhere in the middle she moves a few kingdoms around like puzzle pieces. You trail behind her this morning, barely keeping pace as she strides toward the council hut. It's not so much a building as a meeting space, shaded and ringed with elders, advisors, military captains, and a handful of slightly frazzled scribes. There's no parchment here. Messages are scratched onto bark, painted onto walls, whispered through messengers who've memorized every word with a precision that would make an audio engineer weep. At the center of it all sits Njinga, on a stool today carved low, curved to her posture. You note this because everyone else sits lower if they sit at all. You remember that infamous folding chair moment, and suddenly every seating arrangement feels deliberate, as if the geometry of people in a room is part of her military strategy. They're discussing a new problem now. Not a new problem, but an old one. Wearing a new disguise, the Portuguese are pushing again, slithering inland from Luanda, hungry for more enslaved people and more trade monopolies. They're building forts. They're forging alliances with rival tribes. They're appointing puppet rulers in provinces Jinga considers hers. And here's the kicker, her own brother may be helping them. You feel the mood darken like a storm cloud dragging its shadow across a sunlit field. Ngola Mbande, the official King Njinga's brother, is unreliable. Some say he poisoned their older brother to claim the throne. Others say he drinks too much palm wine and trusts Portuguese priests more than his own ancestors. Historians still argue whether Njinga actually supported him or merely tolerated him as a stepping stone to the throne she believed she could rule better. You lean against a pillar and glance sideways. A young captain stands rigid nearby, eyes darting from Njinga's face to her fingers, which are drumming slowly against her knee. She's thinking, calculating, already rewriting tomorrow's map in her head. Let's pause on a weird little footnote. Jena was known to keep a court of young men who dressed as women, wore their hair in elaborate styles, and lived as her personal companions and possibly lovers. Portuguese missionaries were scandalized. Local accounts were more matter of fact. Some scholars think this was ritual. Others believe it was a form of political theater. Either way, it challenged the idea of gender as fixed or binary. In Jenga's world, power wore what it pleased. You're pulled back into the moment as a messenger bursts into the room, panting, dust-covered, half-bowed. He carries news from the Kwanza River region. Portuguese soldiers have torched 3 villages, captured dozens, and left their banner flying like a bloody flag on a hilltop. One of Njinga's allies, a lesser chief, has defected, probably bribed with guns or horses, or a half-empty bottle of European wine. Some people really are that easy. Jinga doesn't rage. She nods slowly. You see it in her eyes, though, that little flicker of offense, the mental note being made. She asked the messenger 2 calm questions: how many men were taken and what color were the flames? Yes, color, because when villages burn, it tells you things. Whether the roofs were thatched with grass or bark, whether gunpowder was used or oil, whether it was vengeance or warning, she dismisses the council early. No shouting, no long speeches, just a short phrase, "Tomorrow we move." And just like that, the queen becomes the general again. Back in her chamber, she lays out her armor. Not the clanky medieval nonsense you're imagining, but a sleek mix of leather, metal, and cloth. Everything lightweight, flexible, quiet. She's not marching with a parade. She's vanishing into the forest with a ghost army. You follow her to the riverbank later, where her scouts are already positioning supplies. The river glitters like polished obsidian. Dugout canoes sit half-submerged, packed with weapons, food, and bundles wrapped in waxed cloth. Children help too, learning early that survival in this kingdom isn't optional. One small boy lugs a bundle nearly his size, muttering to himself. You can't hear what he's saying until you pass him. She sits on the world and the world cannot stand up. Poetry from a kid under 10. Welcome to Njinga's PR team. That night there's no drum beat. Only the steady sound of soldiers sharpening blades, tying bundles, whispering strategies in the flickering light. Njinga sits quietly on a rock, sharpening her own blade. She's not just a symbol, she's a participant. You wonder again if she ever truly slept. If she ever felt the warm, sweet fog of sleep the way you're beginning to now. Probably not. Not with all those people trying to undermine her. Not with brothers plotting and Europeans scheming and messengers bringing bad news like it's a job with health benefits. You curl up on a mat under the stars, the scent of fire smoke clinging to your hair, and try to picture what it's like to lead without a map to rule, without permission to sit, without being invited, and still make everyone bow. You wake before dawn wrapped in a coarse blanket that smells like damp ash and acacia. The camp is already alive with whispers and rustles. No shouting, no trumpets. Queen Jinga's army moves like fog, silent, cold everywhere. Your breath puffs in the morning air as you rise, brushing grit from your sleeves. Around you, men and women tighten sandals, oil blades, strap on satchels, and line up without being told. This isn't a regular army, it's something else. Nyinga stands nearby, backlit by the dying fire, giving quiet instructions to her captains. Her voice is low but firm, the kind that bends even stone toward its will. She's dressed in earth tones, no regal gold or jewels. She vanishes into the landscape, blending like a predator. You realize then that she doesn't just command the forest, she becomes part of it. This ambush will happen near the river bend, where the Portuguese have left their usual overconfidence lying around like unguarded supplies. Their soldiers are used to flat terrain and clear sight lines. They build forts like they're playing Monopoly, all grid and no gut instinct. But Njinga's people have memorized every inch of the wild, every whisper of wind, every snapping branch, every shadow that doesn't match its tree. As you follow the Queen's party along the water's edge, your feet splash in shallow tide pools, silent underfoot. The canoes glide without sound, paddles slicing water like whispers. You clutch the side and try not to breathe too loudly. This is not your battlefield. This is hers. Here's your mainstream historical fact from the day. Queen Jinga was a master of guerrilla warfare long before that term made its way into military textbooks. She waged war not through open fields and sieges, but through sabotage, hit-and-run tactics, psychological warfare, and alliances designed more like chess traps than treaties. and she made it work for 40 years against empires. Fringe fact time. Okay, Njinga sometimes wore a fake beard during official audiences with European envoys, not out of cosplay enthusiasm, but because in some traditions, beards symbolized kingship and spiritual authority. When a woman walked into the role of king, she didn't half-step. She brought props. The ambush unfolds in total silence, like a bad dream from the Portuguese perspective. A small detachment of enemy soldiers heavy with armor and bravado crosses a clearing near the bend. They expect trade, maybe a skirmish, definitely not what happens next. A horn blows once low like a sleeping bull exhaling, then chaos. Archers rise from behind the tall grass, firing with that particular snap that makes your stomach drop. Traps spring underfoot. Njinga's warriors flood the scene with curved blades and spears, their faces painted with ochre and soot. Within 5 minutes, it's over. No dramatics, no extended duels. Just surgical violence, fast and purposeful. The Portuguese survivors drop their weapons and stumble backward, begging in mangled Kimbundu and panicked Portuguese. Nyinga steps forward calmly. Not to gloat, she doesn't do that. She questions the commanding officer, a young man who looks like he thought this gig would be mostly beach views and imported wine. She asks why his men crossed her border uninvited. He stammers, blames a map. She tilts her head and says, "Perhaps the map was wrong, or perhaps you were." She lets a few survivors go. That's the real punishment. They'll carry stories back to Luanda that no report can soften. Tales of ghosts in the forest, of a queen who sees through trees, of a war that doesn't obey the rules. Back at camp, the wounded are tended. Not many, which is the point. Njinga doesn't like messy victories. Her strategy is clean, economical. You begin to notice that she always counts the cost of lives, of time, of reputation. She doesn't gamble. She tallies. One of her officers jokes that even her victories are frugal. That gets a rare smirk from Njinga. Not a laugh, mind you, just enough for you to realize that beneath all this fire-forged royalty is a woman who might have once laughed freely. Before thrones, before treaties written in blood, before folding chairs turned into symbols. As night falls, you linger near the center of camp, watching Jinga speak with her sister Kambu. The two women sit close, heads together. No guards, no formality. You catch fragments, words like Luanda, Dutch ships, betrayal. The Dutch had recently been courted as allies against the Portuguese, and Njinga was weighing whether to trust another foreign power, wearing a polite smile and a hidden dagger. Historians still argue whether Njinga's alliances with Europeans were calculated long games or desperate compromises. Some say she was always in control. Others say she made deals with the devil out of sheer necessity. Probably both. That's kind of her whole thing. As the fire crackles lower, an elder begins a quiet story for the children gathered near the edge of camp. It's not about Njinga. It's about a trickster jackal who outsmarts a lion by pretending to be king. The story ends with the jackal walking away tail high as the lion sleeps in a pit. You glance at Njinga. She's not paying attention. Or maybe she's just good at pretending not to. Later, under a sky the color of bruised velvet, you rest near the river. The reeds sway in the breeze, whispering secrets to each other. You think about the Portuguese soldier who dropped his sword and ran, about Njinga's eyes during that moment, about the line between mercy and message. You close your eyes to the thought of her folding chair, not the one made of iron or wood, but the invisible one she carries everywhere. A metaphorical seat that says, I'm here, whether or not you make room. The smoke from last night's fire still curls upward when you open your eyes, mingling with the damp mist rising from the river. Someone hums nearby, a soft rhythmic tune, half lullaby, half war song. You sit up, neck stiff, limbs cold, and squint across the camp. Jinga's already awake, of course. She's pacing along the edge of the water, deep in thought, her bare feet sinking slightly into the wet earth. This is the part of her process you've come to recognize, the post-battle recalibration. It's like she takes the pieces of the day before, shakes them in her hands like pebbles, and tosses them into the next decision. You watch as a scout jogs up the riverbank toward her, breathless but poised. The young woman drops to one knee and offers a report. A caravan Portuguese traders or possibly missionaries has been spotted a day's walk east. Not armed per se, but not helpless either. Jinga listens, nods once, and tells her captains, send word. We'll meet them. But they come to us. And just like that, she turns a minor encounter into a power move. Here's your big, bold historical truth for today. Queen Jinga was a diplomatic tactician on par with any European monarch of her era. She negotiated treaties in multiple languages. She used Christianity when it suited her, rejected it when it didn't, and repurposed every altar into a bargaining table. In one particularly famous move, she agreed to be baptized, taking the name Ana de Sousa, just so she could gain political legitimacy in the eyes of the Portuguese crown. Whether she actually believed in the faith, let's just say historians still argue whether her conversion was spiritual or strategic. Take a wild guess. Now let's get weird for a second. There's a persistent fringe theory that Njinga may have staged her own baptism to include elements of both Christianity and local spirit rituals. Some reports from the time claim that she mixed sacred oils with palm wine and insisted on an audience of tribal elders during the ceremony. Basically, she hijacked the optics of salvation and made it her own branded experience. If true, that's some next-level spiritual multitasking. As the sun climbs, the camp packs up again. Njinga doesn't stay anywhere too long. She knows stillness breeds vulnerability. You're moving with her entourage now through thickets and thorns, past termite mounds the size of outhouses, following winding trails only her scouts seem to recognize. Occasionally someone breaks into a chant, the kind that keeps your feet moving even when your legs complain. By early afternoon, you reach a clearing where she decides to host the Portuguese visitors. It's deliberately uneven terrain, hard to ride horses, easy to surround. You see what she's doing. A throne isn't always built with golden jewels. Sometimes it's carved from context. When the caravan arrives, they're cautious. 4 men, 1 woman, 2 oxen, dragging carts, and a handful of locals in chains. That last part makes Njinga's face harden. She gestures and one of her warriors steps forward. The chains are removed quietly and the captives are led away. The Portuguese spokesman, a wiry man with thinning hair and more rings than fingers, tries to keep smiling. He bows and calls her Queen Anna. She doesn't correct him, but she doesn't smile either. They present gifts: cloth, salt, a mirror, a cask of wine, all received without comment. Then the man begins his pitch: trade, peace, prosperity. He drops the usual buzzwords like coins into a wishing well. But Njinga listens, unmoved, her face unreadable. Finally, she interrupts. You speak of peace, she says slowly, but carry slaves. The spokesman shifts, clears his throat, and begins a long-winded excuse. Something about misunderstanding, temporary arrangements, delegated authority. You can tell he's reciting from a script written far away in Lisbon. Njinga waits until he's done, then says, "Go back. Tell your king what peace means in this land." And that's that. She doesn't order them harmed. She doesn't imprison them. She just makes the power dynamic unmistakable. She tells them to leave, and they do. One of them trips on a root and nearly face plants into a termite mound. You try not to laugh. Njinga definitely does not. That night, around a much smaller fire than usual, she holds court with just a few advisors. No formal council, no ceremony, just strategy. She speaks of alliances, of the Mbangala, those fearsome nomadic warrior bands infamous for their brutal rites and appetite for plunder. She's been negotiating with them, which is either brilliant or borderline suicidal, depending on who you ask. Some say the Mbangala were mercenaries. Others call them cannibals or death cultists or just extremely misunderstood. Historians still argue whether Njinga genuinely embraced their customs or merely used them as temporary muscle. There are tales, half-true, half-horror story, that she adopted some of their rituals like infant exposure and initiation through violence. Whether those stories are facts or smear campaigns depends on your source and your stomach. You glance over at Njinga. She's sipping something from a gourd, eyes half-lidded, but don't be fooled, she misses nothing. She's already 10 moves ahead, thinking not just about the Portuguese or the Mbangala, but about something bigger, legacy. Because unlike the Europeans, she knows that kingdoms die twice, once when they fall, and again when no one remembers their name. You lie back on your mat staring at the stars. Somewhere beyond that black velvet sky, other rulers sleep under chandeliers and imported silk. But you're here with a queen who doesn't just survive history, she rewrites it. The next morning, the grass is still wet with dew, and your legs ache from yesterday's miles, but Njinga's already on the move again. No fanfare, no breakfast feast, just a barked order, a flick of her wrist, and the whole camp begins folding in on itself like a well-rehearsed stage crew. Tents vanish, fires are doused, and you find yourself walking before your eyes have even fully adjusted to the light. She's heading toward the Kwanzaa River, winding through banana groves and narrow paths between thorny acacia trees. Every few minutes, someone ducks out of the bush to give a quiet report, nothing dramatic, just the kind of routine intelligence that helps Njinga keep her finger on the pulse of a kingdom with no fixed borders. She seems to know everyone's name, and everyone seems to know that if you give her bad intel, you'd better pack light for the afterlife. Today's goal isn't war, though, it's leverage. You arrive by mid-morning at a cluster of huts near a hilltop mission. Yes, an actual Jesuit outpost complete with crossbell and one very confused European priest. He steps out blinking into the sun robes, flapping like an awkward flag, and fumbles a greeting. Njinga responds in flawless Portuguese. You blink. How many languages does she speak Portuguese? Kimbundu, Latin, possibly Spanish. You're starting to suspect she dreams in footnotes. Here's your mainstream history nugget of the hour. Njinga was a master of political code switching. She moved between identities as easily as she moved between landscapes. Catholic convert when it suited her, traditional matriarch when it didn't. She could argue canon law with a priest in the morning and consult with spirit mediums that same evening. And no, she didn't see a contradiction, just tools in the same toolbox. You're ushered into the church, which smells like candle wax dust and the slow decay of foreign ambition. The priest, his name is Father Carvalho, offers you all cassava bread and makes awkward small talk while Njinga scans the room. Her gaze lingers on a battered crucifix. Then she does something strange. She asks the priest for confession. That's when things get interesting. Father Carvalho clears his throat, gestures to a side room, and she follows. You can't hear much, just low murmuring and occasional pause. But when she emerges 15 minutes later, she looks lighter. Not peaceful exactly, but sharpened. Like the weight of her decisions has been redistributed, not removed. Now, for today's quirky little sidebar, some accounts say Njinga used confession as a form of psychological warfare, not against enemies, but against herself. A way to process decisions that would break most people. Imagine ordering a surprise raid, orchestrating a marriage alliance, and negotiating a treaty in the same week, and still having the clarity to unburden your conscience afterward. That's one part ruthlessness, one part therapy, and three parts theater. Later that day, you travel with her to a nearby village where she's been invited to mediate a dispute. Two local leaders' brothers naturally are fighting over land rights. You're expecting drama, maybe shouting, possibly spears. Instead, Jinga listens silently as both men rant. She doesn't interrupt, doesn't sigh, just listens. When they're done, she stands up, walks to a patch of earth between them, and draws a line with the tip of her staff. This is yours, she says to one. This is yours, she says to the other. And if either of you crosses this line again, I will bury you under it. It's not subtle, but it works. Historians still argue whether Njinga was genuinely committed to long-term peace building or just using diplomacy to bide time between wars. Some say she was building a sustainable network of alliances. Others argue she just didn't have the manpower to fight everyone at once. Either way, her decisions always came wrapped in clarity and, when needed, threat. That night, you camped near a baobab tree so large it could house an entire family of elephants. The wind whistles through its hollow trunk, and Jinga takes that as a cue. She tells a story not to you, not directly, but to the flames. It's about her childhood, about the day she first saw Portuguese muskets, about how the noise shook the air louder than thunder and made her think the sky had broken open. She was just a girl then, watching from behind a rock while her father negotiated with men in armor, watching as they smiled with their mouths and not their eyes. That was the moment, she says, that she realized power wasn't about height or strength or even bloodline. It was about knowing what people feared and deciding whether to use it. You glance around the fire. No one's talking. Even the warriors, big as oxen and twice as grizzled, look shaken. Then Jinga laughs, just once. A low rasping chuckle, and the spell breaks. You settle into your mat with a full belly and a slightly fuller understanding of just how sharp her mind is. Not like a blade, no, that's too crude. More like a net. Quiet, flexible, unforgiving. And you wonder just for a moment what would have happened if she had been born in Lisbon or Paris or London. Would she have conquered Europe, or would they have burned her as a witch by age 20? Hard to say, but you're glad she was born right here, where the baobab trees hum lullabies and the fires never die, and power walks on bare feet and carries no throne. The next morning arrives not with sunrise, but with the soft thudding of bare feet and the muffled clatter of camp gear being packed. You roll over on your straw mat to find the fire's long since gone out, and Jenna already gone again. She doesn't linger in places, she's settled disputes. That would feel too much like gloating, or worse, comfort. And Queen Jinga's never comfortable. Comfort breeds softness, and softness doesn't survive here. You trudge after the group muscles protesting, following a winding path that hugs the edge of a ridge, overlooking the wide floodplains of the Kwanzaa. It's mosquito country now. You swat at your neck and wonder what 17th century bug repellent might have been. Spoiler, it's probably not great. Clumps of pungent leaves are burned in small bundles and rubbed on the skin. The result, you smell like overcooked salad, but the mosquitoes do seem to take the hint. Today's mission isn't governance, it's theater. Not the Shakespeare kind, though Njinga would probably enjoy a good monologue. No, this is the kind of political theater where you gather everyone who matters within 100 kilometers, give them a show, and quietly remind them who owns the stage. As you descend into a bustling market town near the river's bend, banners ripple in the wind, and women in brilliant head wraps pass by, carrying baskets of fish fruits and gossip. There's already a buzz Queen Jinga is arriving, and people are whispering about what she'll say, what she'll wear, and yes, whether she'll bring out that chair, the infamous folding chair. Now here's your mainstream history fact. In 1622, during a tense diplomatic audience with the Portuguese governor in Luanda, Njinga arrived without the formal seat she was entitled to. While the governor lounged on a grand chair, she was expected to sit on a mat symbolic of submission. Instead, she had one of her attendants kneel and used him as a human stool. That was the birth of the legend. And from that day, folding chairs followed her like shadows, literal symbols of her refusal to bow. Today, she doesn't make anyone kneel. She has an actual folding chair, and it's magnificent. Dark wood trimmed with cowrie shells and brass studs, it unfolds with a creak that hushes the crowd. She sits. The audience begins. One by one, chiefs and envoys approach her. There are trade discussions, sure, rumors of skirmishes on the southern frontier, talk of grain shortages in the uplands. But none of them are why you're here. You're here for the pageantry, because every word, every gesture, every pause, it's all part of the performance. She listens. She nods. She raises an eyebrow that could curdle milk. And when she speaks, it's always brief and sharp, like the flick of a drum beat. Her attendants repeat each decree with reverence, but also fear. No one wants to misquote the queen. You wouldn't want to become part of the scenery in her next political demonstration. Time for a fringe tidbit. Some historians believe Njinga's infamous chair became so iconic that rival rulers started mimicking it, trying to craft similar thrones with collapsible legs and wide seats, hoping a bit of her power might rub off on them. Imagine monarchs competing in early 1600s Angola not with armies, but with portable furniture design. IKEA, but with war paint. The audience continues until well past midday, the heat sticky and unrelenting. You're tempted to close your eyes just for a minute when the drums begin. Jinga's preparing to deliver the final statement of the day, and she never does that without a little flair. She stands slowly and the crowd leans in. Not a murmur, not a footstep. Then she lifts her chin and gives a quiet command. The folding chair is taken away, carried like a sacred object. She walks forward barefoot, standing atop a woven mat. And in her hand is a ceremonial spear, She doesn't raise it. She plants it firmly in the center of the meeting ground. Then she speaks. You will remember she says that Ndongo does not kneel. We do not beg. We speak, we trade, we defend. And that's it. No flowery send-off. Just a truth bomb delivered with the precision of a scalpel. Historians still argue whether the legend of the chair was a one-time event or a recurring spectacle Njinga milked for decades. Was it mythologized by the Portuguese to make her seem exotic? Or did Njinga herself encourage the tale, using it like an early version of PR branding? Either way, the chair endures. Not as furniture, but as metaphor. You follow the entourage out of town, the chair now packed away, and the sun beginning to slide toward the horizon. There's no speech about the day's success, no debriefing around the fire. Njinga just walks her back straight, her stride unhurried. And you understand now that power isn't loud. It's not even violent. It's the ability to make people wait for your next move, and then remember it for the next 400 years. The river glows with orange light. Fishermen pull in their nets. Somewhere in the brush, a monkey laughs, a sound that somehow feels sarcastic. Or maybe that's just your brain slowly pickling in historical context and sunstroke. You wonder if she ever gets tired of the show, if the crown ever itches, if she ever wishes she could just sit without folding chairs or watching eyes. But Njinga doesn't slow, and so neither do you. You wake the next morning to the rhythmic splash of paddles slicing through water. Mist coils above the river like smoke from a giant's forgotten campfire. Njinga, of course, is already aboard the lead canoe legs, crossed like she's on a breakfast terrace, not a narrow wooden hull riding low with cargo and the weight of a kingdom's expectations. You wobble into your seat, less thrown, more glorified log, and try not to fall in before breakfast. The water is slow and wide here, lazy even, but the atmosphere is anything but. Njinga's flotilla moves like a procession. Not for stealth, not for fun. This is diplomatic sailing. You're en route to a Portuguese fort, though no one says it out loud. It's like mentioning spiders at bedtime, not technically forbidden, just a little cruel. Here's your mainstream fact of the day after the initial shock of Njinga's clever maneuver. At that 1622 meeting, the Portuguese didn't exactly back off. They kept pressing for more tribute, more submission, more territory. But Njinga played them like a well-tuned drum. At times she posed as an ally, even converting to Christianity and taking the name Ana de Sousa, named after the governor's wife. Yet at other moments she raided Portuguese holdings, supported rival kingdoms, and stirred rebellions like a spoon in hot porridge. Today's visit falls into the pretend to be nice category, the kind of diplomacy that feels more like competitive chess, but with more spears. As your canoe docks, you spot the fortress' low stone walls, cannons that haven't fired in years, and a Portuguese flag that flaps as if it knows it's only tolerated. You step onto the riverbank and immediately notice how tense the soldiers are. Helmets, polished boots too clean, like a child forced to tidy their room when company comes. Njinga doesn't flinch. She walks past them with a nod that lands somewhere between regal and faintly bored. Inside the fort, you pass rooms with imported Portuguese chairs carved from dark wood, ornate and stiff. Njinga doesn't sit in any of them. The meeting room is hot, windows narrow, barely more than arrow slits. A Portuguese commander, older, sunburned with an expression like he's chewing dried figs, offers greetings through a translator. Njinga smiles. It's a small, tight expression that says, I am deeply unimpressed by your facial hair. And here's where the real theater begins. They talk in layers on the surface trade routes and marriage alliances, beneath tension and suspicion. Njinga keeps her tone light, but her words are precise like arrows tipped with honey. She compliments the fort's construction, then casually asks how long it could withstand siege. She asks about Catholic masses, then reminds them she also leads spiritual rituals among her people, equally valid, thank you very much. And then the fringe tidbit for today, Njinga was rumored to carry an official Portuguese Catholic priest in her retinue, mainly as a decoration. She'd wheel him out for negotiations, let him speak Latin blessings, then quietly override him the moment they were back on the trail. It's unclear if the priest even understood what role he was playing, prop pawn or pious ornament. At one point in the meeting, the commander offers her a gift, a bolt of silk from Lisbon. Jinga accepts it with a nod, then immediately hands it off to a servant as though it's a backup napkin. The message is clear: I'm not here to shop. The negotiations drag into late afternoon. Tea is served, or something like tea, a watery infusion of local herbs that tastes faintly like regret and mint. You sip it politely. Njinga doesn't touch hers. And then out of nowhere, Njinga stands. No warning. She walks to the open door, looks out toward the river, and begins speaking, not to the commander, not to anyone in particular, just aloud. She talks about the river's patience, how it carves stone slowly, relentlessly, how it carries seeds and washes away bones, and how those who try to dam it always end up drowning in their own cleverness. The commander looks confused. Maybe this is metaphor. Maybe this is threat. Maybe it's just a really weird poem. But no one laughs. Historians still argue whether that moment was intentional, a veiled threat, or spontaneous performance art. Some say she was reciting a proverb from her grandmother. Others think she was simply bored and toying with the room. But what they all agree on is this: the Portuguese didn't gain a single concession that day. Back on the boats, the mood is quiet. Jinga unwraps a small packet of dried fruit and pops one in her mouth. She doesn't speak again until the fortress is a dot on the horizon. And then she says, almost to herself, they mistake softness for surrender. They always do. Night falls over the river like a curtain. You lie back against the canoe's curve, staring up at stars that seem impossibly numerous, as if the sky can't help but eavesdrop on such power plays. Somewhere behind you, the folding chair creaks softly in its wrappings. Even it seems smug tonight. The journey inland is slow and punishing. You're no longer gliding down rivers with breezes to soften the heat you're walking, trudging more like. The terrain changes from soft soil to dry brush, then to rocky trails baked in the kind of sun that makes your thoughts feel toasted. Njinga rides part of the way not on a war horse, but in a sling carried by attendants. Because when you're a queen, blistered feet are not your concern. This is no sightseeing tour. You're heading to Matamba, a neighboring kingdom to Ndongo, but not exactly a friendly one. Or at least it wasn't until Njinga decided it would be. And when Njinga decides something, the earth usually rearranges itself accordingly. Mainstream history fact incoming. In the mid-1620s, after years of conflict with both the Portuguese and internal Ndongo rivals, Njinga fled to Matamba, not to hide but to conquer. She overthrew the local queen, possibly her own cousin, and declared herself ruler. It wasn't subtle. It was, however, extremely effective. The capital of Matamba rises in the distance, a cluster of wooden walls and thatched roofs perched on a rise like it's watching you arrive with narrowed eyes. There's no fanfare, no drums, just silence and heat and a few curious goats that look like they might be spies. You cross through the main gate, and it's instantly clear this isn't your average invading warlord moves in story. Njinga isn't burning things down. She's inspecting the place like she's appraising a fixer-upper, checking the grain stores, peeking under roof beams, asking sharp questions about irrigation. She speaks to the local leaders not like a conqueror, but like a rival CEO who's just acquired a smaller company and plans to streamline operations. And then there's the weird bit. Your quirky tidbit for the day in Jinga kept a personal harem of young men dressed as women known as her chambongos. They attended to her, sometimes fought in battle, and may have been part of religious rituals or perhaps just part of her personal power aesthetic. It's unclear. One traveler claimed they mimicked female hairstyles and wore scented oils. Another insisted they were warriors in disguise. Njinga never explained. That was kind of her thing. The Matamba court adjusts as courts do when there's no choice. Some nobles resist. They disappear. Others swear loyalty. They prosper. Within months, Njinga transforms Matamba into a base of operations far more secure than anything she had in Dongo. Better terrain, better trade routes, better defenses, and critically farther from Portuguese muskets. You're given a room, well, more of a wooden square with a mat and a curtain, while Njinga claims the royal chamber and immediately has the walls redone in red ochre and river clay. She replaces a broken throne with a new one, more folding chair than jewel-covered monstrosity. She says it travels better. She also holds court in the evenings. Long discussions, less ceremony. People come from nearby villages to petition her disputes over cattle land water rights. One night a young woman argues that her neighbor's goat is cursed and keeps spitting on her laundry. Njinga listens without laughing, which is more than you manage. She orders the goat and the laundry inspected by a priest. No goats are executed, but the priest walks away very thoughtful. Then comes the first Portuguese messenger. He's brought in wearing the stiff sort of uniform that screams, "I'm important," while also making it difficult to breathe. He bows hands over a scroll and doesn't quite make eye contact. The scroll is full of demands. Return hostages, open trade routes, stop raiding convoys. Njinga reads it slowly, like it's a mildly interesting recipe. Then she writes her reply at the back, "Only when I'm bored enough to care." That may not be the literal translation, but it's definitely the energy. Historians still argue whether her conquest of Matamba was premeditated or improvisational. Some say she always had her eye on it, waiting for the right moment. Others argue she adapted brilliantly to circumstances, playing three-dimensional chess, while others were still unwrapping the board. What's clear is that from here, Njinga finally had a proper base of operations, one that lasted. She consolidated power not just through force, but through diplomacy, economic reform, and spiritual authority. She invited priests but kept them on tight leashes. She allowed trade but taxed it heavily. And yes, she kept that chair nearby folded like a loyal dog. One afternoon, you helped distribute cloth and salt to new subjects' gifts to grease the loyalty machine. A man asks you why the queen is giving so much away. You pause. You almost say, because she's buying your soul, but you settle on, because she believes loyalty tastes better when it's salted. Night brings another court session. This time it's war planning. A map drawn in ash on the floor. Stones mark forts. Sticks mark rivers. Njinga moves them around like it's all a game. And maybe to her it is. A very long, very personal game of keep away from European colonizers. You realize at some point that you're no longer surprised by her. Not by the boldness, not by the humor, not even by the moments of odd tenderness when she corrects a child's posture or lets a dog sit by her feet. The air is cooler tonight. Stars blink above, and the Matamba Hills echo with the distant sounds of drum signals or celebrations you don't know. But you feel something settling. Njinga is no longer a fugitive. She's a queen with a capital city, a war leader with her own court, and a woman with exactly one chair she trusts enough to sit on in public. You wake to the unmistakable rhythm of sharpened blades slicing through the morning air. Matamba's warriors are training, and Njinga is already among them, dressed not in royal silks, but in leather wrappings, her spear twirling so fast it hums. She's not doing this for show. She's sweating, shouting commands, occasionally demonstrating how to disarm someone twice her size with a flick of the wrist. It's the kind of morning routine that makes your usual cup of tea and doom scroll look embarrassingly tame. This is the warrior queen phase, not a temporary mood, a lifestyle. Nyanga doesn't just want to hold Matamba, she wants to project power far beyond it. And she knows military might alone won't be enough. So between sparring sessions, she's working on something far less glamorous, a bureaucracy. That's right, this section contains your daily dose of spreadsheets, or at least their 17th century Angolan equivalents. Njinga reorganizes her administration, builds up tax systems, creates new positions in court, and appoints people based not on lineage, but on loyalty and competence. That sounds incredibly modern until you remember some of the job interviews involved ritual dancing and possibly animal sacrifices. Mainstream historical fact here, Njinga created a highly centralized state in Matamba, a rarity in the region at the time. She instituted royal decrees, demanded detailed reports from local chiefs, and maintained complex trade relationships with multiple African kingdoms and European powers alike. Yes, she waged war, but she also understood paperwork. What's even more unusual, she forged alliances with runaway slaves and mercenaries from Portuguese-controlled areas. People fled to her territory for freedom, but they didn't just get protection. She gave them jobs, sometimes in her army, sometimes in governance. She was building something multicultural, multi-ethnic, and weirdly efficient for a kingdom born in exile. You, of course, are tasked with helping one of her aides organize shipments of Cowrie-Shell's currency in the region into neat piles for redistribution. There's nothing quite like counting shells by candlelight while someone recites cattle tax statistics to lull you into historical numbness. And now for your quirky tidbit, Njinga allegedly used coded language and color-coordinated robes to send secret messages during court proceedings. One ambassador once noted that the queen's earrings changed depending on the gravity of the subject. Green meant peace, red meant war, and if she wore one of each, it meant she was waiting for someone to trip over their own argument before attacking it. Historians still argue whether these dress codes were deliberate signals or just deeply fashionable accidents. Some claim Jinga's court had an almost theatrical flair for costume-based diplomacy. Others say the Portuguese likely misunderstood or projected European codes onto African traditions. But you've seen it. One day she's draped in blood-red feathers, the next she's in simple white cotton. And yes, the tone of her meetings does shift accordingly. Coincidence, or just next-level stage management. Either way it works. One afternoon, Njinga hosts a gathering of regional chiefs in her ceremonial courtyard. You get a front row seat. They arrive on foot and horseback dressed in leopard skins and bird bones, flanked by guards who clearly skipped leg day in favor of massive axe day. These are not polite company. These are power players, each thinking they might outwit the famous Queen of Two Kingdoms. Nyinga enters barefoot. Her chair is already unfolded at the center. She does not sit. Instead, she walks slowly around the courtyard, addressing each chief by name. Some she greets like family. Others she reminds politely that they once tried to kill her. She finishes her lap, finally sits, and then drops a dagger at her feet. Her speech is short. Peace or this. That's it. Most of the chiefs bow. A few twitch, none refuse. Later, over roasted plantains and sour palm wine, Jinga laughs with her advisors. She's relaxed, but you notice she still wears her armor beneath her robes. She never takes it off completely, just in case diplomacy turns into dodgeball with knives. You learn quickly that Njinga's concept of rule is fluid. Sometimes she's the fierce general, sometimes the spiritual medium, sometimes the negotiator who smiles like she's already counted your weaknesses. She holds open court on Mondays, battles on Wednesdays, and offers public blessings during eclipses, because why not multitask? A courier rushes in one evening with news the Portuguese are preparing a counterstrike. Njinga's raids on her caravans have finally provoked a full response. She doesn't flinch. Instead, she calls a meeting with her military captains, draws up maps in the dust with her toe, and calmly schedules an ambush for the following week. You're told to start preparing food supplies and arranging for decoys, wooden carts with dummies in them, meant to look like convoys moving toward a distant pass. It's the old fake-out strategy, 1600s edition. As you're stacking sacks of grain and wondering how to bribe a goat into standing still for hours, one of Njinga's aides casually mentions that she once walked 100 miles barefoot to escape a trap. That's not an exaggeration. It's more like a warning: never assume you've got her cornered. By moonlight, Njinga reviews a new list of village births and deaths. She nods at the number of newborns, frowns at an uptick in snakebite fatalities. You half expect her to go to war with the snakes. She turns to you and says, almost too softly to hear, "People forget that queens carry more than swords." Then she dismisses you for the night. No fanfare, no firelight wisdom, just a woman running a kingdom, one spreadsheet, spear drill, and goat-spitting incident at a time. The air smells of wood smoke and tamarind. A hush hangs over the Matamba court. And tonight it's not because of a surprise military maneuver or one of Njinga's silent, soul-crushing stare-downs. No, tonight is about spectacle. You're standing among dozens of onlookers as Njinga prepares to receive an official Portuguese delegation. The kind of meeting that makes or breaks kingdoms. You shift uncomfortably in your not at all subtle disguise as a palm wine server. The folding chair is already there, unfolded, waiting. But Njinga isn't. The delegation arrives on horseback in ornate uniforms that would wilt in a decent breeze. They're armed technically, though etiquette demands they act like they aren't. And then from behind a screen of fabric embroidered with firebirds and rivers, Njinga steps forward. She's glowing. Not metaphorically, her skin is literally oiled to shimmer. She's draped in a robe that flickers between silver and ash gray, depending on how the torchlight catches it. And when she moves, it's with the deliberate grace of someone who knows exactly how much power she holds and just how badly the other side wants to pretend she doesn't. Mainstream fact here, Njinga negotiated at least 3 formal treaties with the Portuguese across her reign, each time tweaking terms, testing limits, and using loopholes better than most modern lawyers. She wasn't just fighting them on the battlefield, she was litigating them into exhaustion. Today's meeting concerns trade routes and the return of captives. You spot a translator sweating buckets between both parties, trying not to ruin centuries of diplomacy with one poorly translated word. Njinga lets the Portuguese envoy ramble about mutual interest and Christian goodwill for a solid 10 minutes before she raises her hand. Then she speaks calm control with just enough tilt to her head to suggest she's doing them the favor of listening at all. And then comes the moment. She nods once to a servant who produces an extra chair and places it directly across from her, lower than hers by about 6 inches. The envoy looks at it, then looks at her, and something very small but very important breaks in his posture. He knows. She's in charge here. Quirky tidbit, some accounts claim Njinga would occasionally make male ambassadors wear women's clothing during negotiations, not as humiliation, but to symbolize submission to the Queen Mother. Whether that's true or not, scholars still argue whether these stories were factual or colonial embellishment intended to undermine her image in European eyes. One theory, the Portuguese were so stunned by being outmaneuvered by a woman that they invented stories just to feel better about it. Regardless of the truth, the mood in the tent shifts when Njinga starts listing her terms. She wants unrestricted access to the Kwanzaa River protection for her border villages, and yes, more Portuguese firearms. Not to turn on them, of course. Purely defensive. Definitely not for raiding their outposts in 6 months. Promise. The envoy hesitates. She smiles. And then she opens a small scroll with a list of captured Portuguese soldiers she's willing to trade if the terms are agreeable. Their names are written in perfect looping script. You glance down at the document and notice something odd. Next to each name is a symbol. A lion, a snake, a hand. You later find out these are Njinga's private classification system for how useful or dangerous each captive might be. Scholars still puzzle over the meanings. One theory is that lions indicated loyalty, snakes meant dangerous knowledge, and hands marked those with a specific trade like carpenters or blacksmiths. You pretend not to notice when one captive's name is crossed out mid-negotiation. Apparently someone's snake status got them reassigned to indefinite holding. The envoy, increasingly aware he's not winning, offers Njinga a rosary gold studded with tiny rubies as a peace token. She accepts it with a practiced nod, but does not kiss the crucifix. A subtle but deliberate move. Later in private, she hands it to one of her priests and tells him to use the metal for something useful. That evening, Njinga holds a feast not to honor the Portuguese, but to celebrate her own patience. The folding chair is nowhere in sight. She sits on a carved wooden throne flanked by 2 flaming torches shaped like spears. The food is rich and heavy grilled fish. Cassava soaked in palm oil, cakes filled with sweetened yams. You find yourself seated next to a captured missionary who's now living rather comfortably under Njinga's employ as an informal scribe. She knows Latin better than I do, he mutters between bites. She just pretends not to. You nod. That tracks. The feast eventually becomes a dance. Jinga watches from her throne as the court musicians play a steady pulsing rhythm. Some dancers wear masks shaped like Portuguese helmets. One wears a cassock and spins in dizzying circles until he collapses in the dirt. Jinga doesn't laugh, but you see the edge of a smile. Later that night, you help extinguish the torches and find yourself once again folding the infamous chair. It's lighter than it looks, worn soft where her hands grip it. One leg is a little shorter than the others. There's a small notch carved into the seat, possibly a tally mark. One historian would later claim each mark corresponded to a successful negotiation. If that's true, Njinga must have needed more than one chair. As you carry it back into storage, you realize this isn't just a prop. It's a symbol of everything Njinga represents. Fluid authority, grounded in ritual but quick to adapt, capable of folding away power and then snapping it back open when the world least expects it. The rainy season creeps in like a second act that no one rehearsed for. You can hear it long before it arrives, deep rolling thunder echoing across the ridges, frogs croaking like tiny backup singers, and that ominous hush from the birds that tells you you'd better find a roof. Fast. Najinga doesn't slow down. She adapts. If anything, she speeds up her pace like she's racing the storms. You follow her through a series of muddy encampments where tents rise and fall in days and roads become temporary swamps. Still, she's always crisp, dry, ironed somehow, and somehow unbothered by the fact that your boots now smell like fermented moss. She's preparing a campaign, not war in the classic sense, but a season of ambushes, diversions, and raids. You're shadowing her through the small villages tucked between river bends places with names you can't pronounce yet, but already feel like they belong to her. In many ways they do. The people greet her like family and she greets them back by name. She remembers their children's names, their pets. That time one of them brought her honey wrapped in banana leaves. Mainstream fact here, by the 1640s, Njinga had shifted her power base to the kingdom of Matamba, using it as a springboard for her broader ambitions. Though officially Christian and diplomatically Portuguese aligned on paper, she led a de facto independent state. A kind of diplomatic catfish profile, smiling in the photo, but holding a dagger behind her back. And this is where it gets interesting. As the rain pounds harder, you're ushered into one of her planning huts, more like a mobile command center, made of woven reed and canvas, complete with maps, carved figurines representing troop positions, and a reed mat in the center where no one dares sit but her. Except there's the folding chair, unfolded again. She doesn't always sit on it, but she always places it there, facing the door, like it's waiting for someone. Quirky tidbit: Njinga's maps weren't the kind you'd find rolled up in a dusty cabinet in Lisbon. They were three-dimensional. Some historians believe she used animal bones or carved ivory pieces to mark not only geography, but terrain conditions, rainfall patterns, even spiritual hotspots. Her generals could read them like Braille touch-based strategy. Historians still argue whether these map tokens were symbolic or functional. One school of thought says they were part of ritual divination, like moving spirit pieces on a board to consult ancestors. Others think they were just hyper-efficient logistics. Maybe both. With Njinga, it's rarely just one thing. She traces a finger across a river bend, then nods at a boy who scampers off with a message. You'll later hear that he delivered a decoy order, a fake attack plan intended to be intercepted. Sure enough, days later, Portuguese patrols fan out in the wrong direction, following ghosts. The real army, meanwhile, floats silently down the tributary on hollowed logs. You find yourself posted near the outskirts assigned to a scouting group. Not that Njinga needs you there. This is more for your own education than her benefit. You're paired with an older warrior named Kanda, who teaches you between chews of roasted cassava how to tell a Portuguese musket line from a shadow. If it doesn't move for 10 minutes, he says it's probably a soldier trying to be clever. You don't find that comforting. But here's the thing, the more time you spend on these damp marches, the more you start to see what makes Njinga's command work. It's not fear, though. That's definitely part of it. It's buy-in. People believe in her, not because she's infallible, she's not, but because she's in it with them. Every meal, every decision, every danger. She doesn't sit in a distant palace eating peeled fruit while others bleed. She sits next to the campfire listening. One night she does exactly that. You're huddled beneath a makeshift awning when Jinga shows up, folding chair under one arm, and plops down without ceremony. The fire pops. She roasts a yam herself. You nearly pass out from sheer confusion. Then she tells a story, quietly, about her sister Kafunji, who once tried to betray her in favor of a Portuguese-aligned cousin. She doesn't tell it with rage, just a kind of thoughtful detachment, like someone remembering a scar that doesn't hurt anymore. And yet she says, eyes on the fire, I still left her a place at the council, not because I trusted her, but because I needed her voice in the room. You don't know what to say. You mostly nod like an overwhelmed intern. Another thunderclap rolls in. The rains are heavier now, turning trails into rivers and rivers into battlegrounds. The enemy's muskets misfire in the wet, their horses slip in the mud. Njinga's fighters, on the other hand, practically dance through it. She'd trained them to move like water. One of the generals, you meet, a man named Bulu, insists that Njinga picked him not for his strength, but because he could predict when a storm was coming based on how frogs changed their tone. She trusts instinct more than weapons, he says. A gun can jam. A gut feeling, not so much. That night you return to the planning tent and see something strange. The folding chair is folded, for once, placed neatly in the corner. And in its place is a woven mat newly spread. Njinga sits cross-legged, staring at the map tokens. One of them, a lion, has been moved to the center. You ask if she's making a new plan. No, she murmurs, I'm listening. And you realize she's not strategizing. She's communing with her ancestors, with the land, maybe even with the rain. And somehow that folding chair, always associated with her commanding presence, is now an offering. A gesture of humility, a temporary stepping back to let older voices speak. You wake up to gunfire, or rather the far-off crackle of it. Jinga's timing was flawless again. The Portuguese fort was supposed to be unbreachable this time, a symbol of European permanence tucked deep into Kimbundu territory. Yet here it is, already cracking under pressure. You smell smoke before you see flames. And beneath it all, that strange wet scent of storm-drenched grass and stirred-up soil, like the earth itself is leaning in to watch. The attack isn't a full frontal assault. Of course not. Njinga rarely does full frontal. It's a trap door of a plan. Distractions, feints, whispered rumors, and unexpected silence. A half-dozen torch-wielding decoys lure the Portuguese cavalry one way, while her real fighters scaled the rear embankment in silence, using vines soaked in river mud to avoid detection. Mainstream fact, this wasn't just improvisation. Njinga spent years developing a kind of hybrid warfare, blending Portuguese tactics, regional combat traditions, and her own innovations. Her army included defected Portuguese-trained troops, enslaved escapees, local hunters, even women trained in guerrilla combat. It was less like a standing army and more like an ecosystem. And she was the queen bee in the hive, issuing pulses of strategy through layers of trust. And that chair, yes, it's still a thing. Today it's strapped to a carrier behind her, just in case the moment demands a power pose. But most of the time now, she doesn't even use it. The chair has started becoming a symbol that doesn't require sitting. It's like that office coffee mug with your name on it, that you never drink from, it just marks the space as yours. But let's not get too comfortable. You nearly step on a Portuguese helmet wedged under a fern. There's no head in it, thankfully, but there was. You do your best not to retch. Njinga, meanwhile, steps over it without missing a beat. Quirky tidbit, some of Njinga's soldiers wore animal masks into battle hyena crocodile pangolin, not for disguise but for psychological warfare. It gave them the edge of being half man, half monster. One Portuguese diarist called it like being hunted by dreams. Others wrote they were possessed, which frankly might have been the point. You crouch low near a fallen log as Njinga signals with her fingers. You've picked up a little of her silent language. Two fingers flicked like raindrops means circle wide. A clenched fist pressed to the chest means protect. A thumb across the throat obviously means you'd better sharpen your blade. But the battle today isn't about brute force. It's about stalling. Njinga isn't trying to destroy the fort. She's trying to make its existence unbearable. The Portuguese inside are already sick dysentery, malarial fevers, bitten by bugs they can't name, and stung by plants they never knew could itch for days. And Njinga's fighters, they don't attack. They deny. No water, no firewood, no clean path in or out. Historians still argue whether this campaign marked the beginning of the end for permanent Portuguese expansion inland. Some say it was a turning point. Others think the Portuguese would have eventually withdrawn anyway, pulled back by other colonial pressures. But in the rain-soaked days of this siege, it's clear Queen Njinga has made the land itself her ally. By evening, the smoke has thickened into something you feel in your teeth. Njinga walks the outer perimeter, folding chair once again upright and in use this time not as a throne, but as a shielded seat under a canopy where she interviews a captured messenger. She doesn't shout. She doesn't threaten. She simply asks the man if he's thirsty, then waits, and waits, and waits. Eventually he talks. Apparently reinforcements aren't coming. The Portuguese fort has been ordered to hold at all costs, but no one's en route. It's too deep, too wet, too problematic. You catch a flicker of emotion on Jinga's face, satisfaction maybe, or pity. She nods to her scribes. Yes, she travels with scribes and has them pen a letter to the Portuguese governor. She offers safe passage out of the fort in exchange for supplies and the promise that they'll never return to this valley. You watch her hand sign the parchment. Her signature is almost calligraphic, elegant, deliberate. The kind of penmanship that says this is both an offer and a warning. She seals it with wax, presses her thumb into the stamp, then hands it to a runner. Tell them they have until moonrise, she says. That night around the fire, people tell stories. Not just of war, but of Njinga's childhood, of how she used to wrestle crocodile hatchlings for fun, of how she once outwitted a Portuguese priest by quoting Latin back at him flawlessly, of the first time she sat on that now famous folding chair, not as a power move, but because she'd been walking for 2 days and her legs simply gave out. You think the chair made her powerful, one old woman says with a laugh. Please, the chair is just smart enough to hold her. Another story makes the rounds, maybe true, maybe not, that Njinga once refused to sleep in the same place 2 nights in a row just to avoid becoming predictable, that she even tricked her own bodyguards, sometimes changing her schedule mid-breath. You look over and see her sharpening a blade, alone, quiet. The firelight plays across her features like flickering shadows of all the queens before her. You can't help wondering if she feels lonely ever. But if she does, she hides it behind a grin and a weapon. The moon rises, no reply comes. Jinga doesn't look surprised. She folds the chair and walks away. You wake to the sound of rain, not gentle storybook rain, but the kind that rattles banana leaves and turns footpaths into slush. And still Njinga moves, barefoot, cloak sodden, utterly unbothered. It's like the water parts for her, or more accurately, dares not slow her down. You try to keep up, shoes squelching, your damp hair slapping against your face. Today she's headed inland, far from the Portuguese fort, toward a meeting place most maps don't even mark. Because the war, you realize, is only ever half fought on battlefields. The real game, the one Njinga plays best, is diplomacy, and not just with the Portuguese, the local kingdoms, the religious orders, even the scattered bands of enslaved people who've escaped into the bush. Njinga negotiates with all of them like it's chess on a three-dimensional board. Mainstream fact: in 1657, Njinga signed a peace treaty with the Portuguese. On paper, it looked like she was giving up, but she wasn't. She was buying time. And if you thought her war strategies were clever, her diplomatic ones are basically a masterclass in controlled chaos. You trudge behind her through thick jungle underbrush until you reach a clearing marked with stones and a strange woven symbol hanging from a fig tree. It's not random, it's assigned to others' neutral ground. No weapons drawn here, at least not until someone lies. Jinga sits, not on her folding chair today, but on a low stool of carved ebony. There's something intimate about it, like she's letting herself be closer to the soil. Across from her sits a chief draped in leopard skins, his eyes narrow but curious. Behind him, a retinue of young warriors shift uneasily, clearly unsure whether they should be intimidated or starstruck. Jinga doesn't speak first. She lets silence do the heavy lifting. You swear it stretches for a full minute before the chief finally clears his throat and says, "You're smaller than the stories." Nyinga smiles. "And you're slower than the messengers." Ouch! Quirky tidbit: Njinga once sent a decoy in her own clothes to a diplomatic meeting just to see if anyone would try poisoning her drink. They did. The decoy lived, but only because she'd been trained to switch cups at the last second. That's right, Njinga basically invented spy training school. The negotiations today are about land, surprise, surprise. The chief claims Njinga's patrols crossed into his territory. Njinga claims his scouts stole from one of her caravans. Historians still argue whether these boundary disputes were real or just excuses to test each other's strength. Either way, Njinga isn't about to back down. She produces a scroll written in Portuguese, Kimbundu, and Latin. The triple language flex is intentional. She's reminding everyone just how many tongues she speaks literally and politically. She reads aloud not angrily, but rhythmically like an incantation. Her voice cuts through the wet air, rising over the buzzing insects and distant thunder. The scroll outlines safe passage for both sides' traders, joint use of a nearby watering hole, and of course a ceremonial marriage between one of Njinga's nieces and the chief's youngest son. You blink. Wait, what? The chief's jaw tightens, but he doesn't reject it outright. Marriages here aren't just love stories, they're treaties in fabric and bone. And Njinga, she's the architect of entire family trees designed to keep people loyal. You catch a murmur from one of Njinga's aides, something about making sure the niece in question is okay with this. Njinga nods. She's already chosen it. She knows what's at stake. This perhaps more than anything defines Njinga's rule control mixed with consent. She wields her power like a blade, yes, but always with awareness. And sometimes, yes, with a little theater. By late afternoon, the treaty is signed. The warriors on both sides exchange wary nods. The leopard-skinned chief reaches out a hand. Njinga takes it, but only after making him wait a beat too long. Just enough to remind him whose land this technically still is. You follow her back through the trees, trying to make sense of everything. Was that a win, a draw? You're still parsing the silence when Njinga suddenly pauses beside a termite mound. They used to put messages in these, she says casually. Little scrolls sealed in wax, carried by slaves who couldn't speak. If you killed the messenger, you'd never know the plan. You glance nervously at the mound. Don't worry, she adds. I don't use those anymore. A beat, then usually. Back at camp, people are weaving mats, mending tunics, boiling roots. The rain has stopped, but the sky is still bruised with clouds. Njinga walks among her people, not giving orders, just being present. And everywhere she goes, children follow too small to fight, too curious to stay away. One tugs at her cloak and asks if the chair has a name. She pauses, then kneels. No name, she says, but it listens. Better than most men. Everyone laughs, and for a moment the jungle seems lighter, like even the trees are chuckling. You sit by the fire that night, watching flames reflect in beads and blades and brass. The smoke curls upward like questions with no clear answers. Was today a victory? Did Njinga gain an ally? Or simply delay another fight? Historians still argue whether these alliances truly held. Some believe Njinga's peace deals were clever stall tactics. Others argue they forged genuine coalitions that outlived her. The truth maybe is both. But right now, as Njinga rests with her head tilted toward the stars, the chair leaning beside her like a patient bodyguard, you know one thing: this woman didn't just survive the age of empires. She outplayed it.